This is part 2 of my response to the YouTube video that's called Why Godzilla Doesn't Work in America. Upon rewatching the video, I feel as though there were some other elements that I need to respond to, so without further hesitation, let's begin.
So yeah, Godzilla is in a constant battle of balance between being really serious and being really stupid, but the good is really good, so let's talk about that good.
I find it so incredibly interesting that you said that there are moments in the Godzilla franchise that are silly, yet the clip that you picked for that particular movie is one of the most serious of the bunch. The video clip that he used comes directly from Godzilla 1984. One of the most central themes for Godzilla 1984 was the fact of the tensions between Russia and America. Obviously, the American version of that movie is actually sillier in comparison to the Japanese version, but by and large, the Japanese version takes itself very seriously. One of the aspects that they used for the American movie was the fact that they were selling Dr. Pepper, and so you have characters basically drinking Dr. Pepper in the movie. If you really want to have an example of a scene where Godzilla acts silly, you could use the example of Megalon or the invasion of the Astro Monster.
When Godzilla turned into a cartoon for kids, a lot of adults stopped caring.
What is this shit?
So then the cycle reset, and this time Goji went to America, where the same thing happened again. We got a serious Godzilla, and people complained that it was too serious with not enough Godzilla, so the franchise became Looney Tunes.
I find it so incredibly interesting that you completely ignored the movies that basically came out during the 1980s, 90s, and the early 2000s. These films, by the way, comes directly from the 80s and 90s. Although the vast majority of these movies had monster fights, they took themselves pretty seriously for the most part. The thing about the American movies is that they're basically replicating the styles that were done by Japanese creators that were done in the 1960s and the early 70s. Starting in 1964, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, we basically see a shift in the personality of the character. This change in personality continued from the movies in the 1960s to the 70s. For the case of the American creators, they're replicating the style that was already done in the 1960s.
And some of the films are fun, I'll admit it, but for the most part, a lot of the legacy of Godzilla just reeks of cheaply made cash grabs.
I don't think it's right to actually characterize Godzilla movies as cheaply made. Back in 1954, Godzilla, together with Seven Samurai, was like one of the most expensive pictures that Toho Studios produced during that time period. Before having the man in the suit, they wanted to have stop motion animation, but unfortunately stop motion animation was really expensive to film during that time period. The movies that basically came out during the 1960s had a pretty huge budget too for Japanese standards. However, during the 1970s, basically Japanese society and the economy was doing really bad. That meant that Toho Studios back then had to cut the budget for like a lot of these movies in the 1970s. Movies like Gigan and Megalon basically relied heavily on stock footage. However, the movies from the 80s onwards had modest budgets.